Hello. So what I'm going to present today is not a well-written paper or a concluded argument, but rather a work in early stages of progress with a lot of collected primary sources, but with unclear conclusions or ways to use these sources. So I'm hoping that also discussion here will help me in that way. So being a woman scientist is a research topic that is now getting a momentum, rather not as a research topic so much, but much more as an field of organizational interventions, organizational changes that are happening at academic institutions and universities. What are dominant paradigms in analyzing the problem of how being a scientist is different for women and women's experience? There are several topics of the research that are very well researched, and I'm just going to list them here, not going to go into details because basically each of these topics is a research field in itself. But if we look from a chronological perspective, we see that the first issue with which women were facing problems with, and then which were also the first issue to be researched, is first the access to university education and equality at workplace, or ability of women to be professionals even in certain fields, which even before the Second World War, women were denied the ability to apply for a range of professional positions, even if they had needed education. This topic did not cease to be relevant. However, nowadays, research is not looking so much into direct, but into indirect discrimination as it plays out in contemporary field, in employment practices, in promotions, how they formally and informally operate, how recognition for academic work is given, and acknowledged also through awards and prestigious positions. Connected with it, a topic that is discussed in present time, but also when analyzing previous historical periods, is the issue of gender stereotypes and biases, which are part of way how academic work is organized, how academic institutions reproduce themselves, and how notions of what academic work is, what science is communicated to the next generations. And all of these notions are deeply gendered. So the concepts of scientific authority, excellence, intellectual work, and production of knowledge are always meant to be presented as an objective definitions. We are now increasingly living the historical moment when we are evaluating academic production, comparing it through numerical criteria. However, all of these criteria are deeply are constructed, socially constructed, always deeply rooted into particular historical social context and gendered in many ways. Therefore, a range of concepts has been developed in the analysis of contemporary academia, and historical academia that are related to that are used in understanding specific experiences and specific features that are faced by women when doing academic work and when engaging with science and intellectual work. These are Matthew and Matilda effects. And I'm going to explain shortly what this is because it's going to be relevant for example I'm going to present later. So Matilda effect was invented by American science historian Margaret Rossiter in publication in 1993, but she did not invent the concept in itself. The concept was rather created or recognized by early feminist, American feminist Matilda Joslyn Gage. This is why it's called Matilda effect. Who was campaigning for women's suffrage and abolitionism in the United States, and who recognized as early as 1883, she pointed to the problem of women being denied recognition for their inventions. Rather, their inventions are often associated to their collaborators, husbands, partners, or to somebody else who at the same historical period was, for instance, dealing with the same scientific problem. In contrast, the so-called Matthew effect describes how academic recognition is disproportionately distributed in such a way that more acknowledged academics who are already more acknowledged are gaining more acknowledgement and accumulating over the time. And here, Robert Merton, who invented the concept, was using a metaphor from Gospel of Matthew, which is saying the richer get richer and the poor get poorer. However, Robert K. Merton, to whom usually the Matthew effect is associated, did not do original research himself on basis of which he created this concept. Rather, it was his life partner and 20 years junior researcher, Harriet Zuckerman, who is still a living and working academic. In a way, the creation of Matthew effect is just confirming the Matilda effect. And very often, Matthew and Matilda effect are actually working together hand in hand. Simply because, yes. Other concepts that are created in contemporary academia are concepts like sticky floor, recognizing that women tend to get stuck in the middle of academic ladder and never progress to the highest, most recognized academic positions. Another metaphor that is used is a leaky pipeline, which is actually describing how women tend to fall out of the pipeline of academic progress, or they tend to fall out disproportionately from the academic competition. This is explained through concepts such as academic inbreeding, which is not only gendered, but very often nationalized or motivated or by specificities of academic context, language, and so on. The academic highest decision-making places are usually described as boys' clubs, which are being closed through mechanisms of gatekeeping. For instance, the ways that promotion criteria are created very often put certain requirements which are not equally achievable or attainable for men and women, such as international travel, visiting fellowships, or gaining competitive projects. And finally, the media and popular cultural representation of a scientist is also deeply gendered, and this is something that is historically true and still turns out to be true as today. Now, all that I described are some of the well-known points developed and discussed in mostly Western academia. Generally, these concepts were not entered the local academia, for instance, of Yugoslavia, by using these particular concepts only in the 1990s. However, it does not mean that issue of gender and other inequalities was not researched in Yugoslav context. It was, but it was not recognized, or it was not. It has not been using the same kind of categorical apparatus and vocabulary as the one I just presented. And also, I think I argue that Yugoslav and socialist academic contexts have certain specificities which require a different way of approaching, understanding, and researching this issue historically and in many ways even nowadays. So, for instance, in Yugoslavia, even before the Second World War, women constituted a significant percentage in student population, even before the Second World War, and this ballooned after the Second World War, obviously. And this was reflected also in the share of women in the research workforce. So, for instance, in 1965, women accounted for 26% of research staff in socialist Yugoslavia as a whole, which of course differed quite considerably among the republics. Of course, we should bear in mind that this academic population at a given time was not as numerous as it was today. So, for instance, in 1965, in Montenegro, there were only 33 registered research workers, and only 4 of them were women. However, this is a significant percentage, which is completely comparable to the percentages, for instance, that we have today. This increased in Yugoslavia over time. So in 1986, the percentage of women researchers was 30%, and this is comparative to the percentage that we have now today in average in the EU. Only these data suffice, I think, for posing the question, so how this was different in socialist period and in Yugoslavia. So what I'm going to present today are snippets from the biographies that were collected for the book I just edited on women scientists in Yugoslavia. These professional biographies were written by mostly women from the disciplines that we are speaking of, and few of them were written by historians like Manca, who wrote a biography of Angela Piskernik, a biologist. Now I focused mostly on the biographies of those women who graduated from late 40s to late 60s, therefore who spent most of their education and professional time in socialist Yugoslavia. So there are several aspects in these biographies that are clearly gendered and that in many ways communicate with what we found in Western knowledge production about women scientists. So the first, just a second. So the first aspect is, of course, the issue of the gendered aspects of authorship and recognition. So, for instance, we have an example of Zagorka Letica, archaeologist from Belgrade, who worked at the Institute of Archaeology and graduated in 1956. She was a key member of the archaeological team that discovered archaeological find in Lepenski Vir in Đerdap Klisura. When you analyze her, the archaeological documents from the archaeological work, spreadsheets, reports and logs, and first-hand academic output that came from these findings, you can recognize that the share of practical work and organization of the field work was pretty much shared between Zagorka Letica and Dragoslav Srejović. However, in the 2 decades after their initial work, Dragoslav Srejović managed to publish books in English about Lepenski Vir, which he initially started working together with Zagorka, but published them singularly. And he was the one who got internationally recognized, who has a boulevard named by himself in Belgrade, and who is generally nowadays recognized as the archaeologist behind one of the great findings in this field in Yugoslavia, or the finding. So this is in a way typical story. Another issue that is recurring is what we nowadays call work-life balance, and that is balancing the unpaid work, care work at home, domestic labor, second or double shift, with very demanding academic work. And this is, for instance, from Ego document or the essay written by Maca Jogan, sociologist from Slovenia, who is now in her retirement but still academic active, who describes in her professional biography how she was very proud that she could equally share the labor at home with her husband, which in many ways was a typical representative of a new man, as she says in her text. However, in other parts of the text, she's speaking about how for 20 years, while her children were underage and she was still developing her academic career, she had to adhere to what she called Spartan work ethics, meaning that it was only family time and work time, and that she never basically had the time of her own or time for leisure. That she was even frustrated that for the 8th of March, her male colleagues would stay for a party in late hours while she had to run back home, and how she basically managed to do her academic career without having support of her, without significant financial means, by basically inviting her younger sister to live with them for 10 years and giving her half of her salary, which was comparatively larger for the dire economic conditions of her sister. Another recurring topic is that self-description, how women felt as an only women in male setting, an only women on a board of an international conference, only women in a lab or in computer lab, as we see from the photo from the late 80s. This is Mirjana Tasić, a person who was a crucial one for establishing the first network, proto-internet network at the University of Belgrade, who graduated in 1970s. And another a recurring topic is also description of this everyday sexism. This is a statement or a memory of Anna Krajnc that you've seen on the photo before as being the only women at the Yugoslav Andragogical Conference. She is describing here how she was frustrated by being referred as a lovely lady, hello, lovely colleague, or beautiful colleague. And she would say, why don't you call me hello, you smart colleague of mine? Another recurring topic is the issue of women's friendship and women's solidarity that was part of everyday work of women in laboratories, in that also transferred into their private time to excursions, and it was important part of their professional socialization. However, what are the questions that are specific for Yugoslav setting? These are the issues of a specific gender regime that in a way navigated between acknowledging between claiming that equality exists in the society, avoiding to acknowledge inequalities where they existed, but also acknowledging them where they existed without referring to them as a feminist issue. I also noticed several issues in their biographies that were silenced. In their professional biographies, they usually tend to silence issues of motherhood, partnership, especially informal partnership, as if this is something that is not directly relevant for their professional biographies or not decent enough to be mentioned in their biographies. So when I was editing 2 books, the similar thing occurred, and that is that in the first draft paper, an author would write about these pieces of information about their motherhood or partnership, but then in final editing, this was edited out and not being part of their professional biography. The issue of social mobility is, of course, specific for Yugoslav setting. It is very important how the system of scholarship, of paid university dorms and the whole support system was enabling a huge social mobility for people, which in a way influenced how working in science was not seen as necessarily a social status in itself, as Mansa described, like being a morally valuable or somehow status, but rather this was a good living, a decent good living. And this is also what transpires in one of the interviews. For instance, Mirjana Tasić described that she chose the study of electrotechnics because this was a fine, clean, decent job for a young lady. Another important issue is the way how Yugoslav scientific field was organized. And that is, it was very often, especially in the applied sciences, connected with the industry, economy, and this is what was expected as part of their intellectual work. So they were interacting with larger social field, and concepts like ivory tower didn't really function or were meaningful for a socialist Yugoslav setting. Yes, there was also this awareness that Yugoslavia holds a specific place in the world academic environment, and that Yugoslav scientists could communicate and were communicating with both East and West and non-aligned movement. However, I did not find much reflection about the race as an element of these academic settings. And this needs to be, I think, researched further. Here you can see Mirjana Karabin, the astrophysicist, who spent part of her postdoc in New Delhi, which was important for her further research. And of course, there is issue of these intra-Yugoslav, trans-Yugoslav issues. Okay, at the end, I'm grappling with the issue of sources and how to read different sources. and issues that I think that are open for further analysis is the issue to what extent this East-West comparison of Western and socialist academic settings is productive and should be and how it interacts with this gender dimension, which has some commonalities and also changes over time. So to what extent gendered and systemic aspects should be divorced? Also, while there are some different disciplinary differences, I think the way that they are understood nowadays do not completely function in the socialist period, but also are not completely irrelevant. So I'm grappling with how to conduct intersectional analysis in the context of socialism, and how to critically assess different sources and this dynamic between written and silenced in different type of sources, which also have different narrative frameworks and genres that go beyond only gendered aspects. Thank you very much.